The ancient conflict between the Juridian Concordat and the Mevlani coalition had raged for centuries across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Thousands of worlds reduced to cinders, trillions of lives extinguished in the crossfire. The Juridians, with their hive mind battalions and living weapons, had matched perfectly against the Mevlani's crystalline technology and tactical precognition. Their mutual hatred had become a constant in galactic politics, as reliable as the laws of physics. On the observation deck of the Assembly's massive station, a gleaming construct of impossible geometries, suspended at the precise gravitational null point between 3 stars, Ambassador Cathal of the Juridians watched the ceremonial fleet withdrawal. His 4 eyes narrowed in suspicion, membranous tentacles coiling and uncoiling around his ceremonial staff of office. The ship drives glowed like artificial stars as the dreadnoughts powered down their planet-killer cannons for the first time in decades. The Mevlani representative, High Chancellor Ixora, stood nearby, her crystalline exoskeleton glimmering with carefully controlled bioluminescence that betrayed no emotion. The soft click-click-click of her thought crystals processing countless strategic simulations was just audible over the hum of the station's fields. "The hostilities are resolved, then," Cathal stated flatly, the translation field rendering his complex pheromonal language into standard galactic. "So they would appear," Ixora replied, her voice like chimes in a digital wind. A slight fractal pattern rippled across her shoulder plates, the Mevlani equivalent of a sardonic smile. Neither truly believed it. Both sides had merely exhausted their resources, their populations weary of conflict. The last Juridian hatchworld had gone sterile from runaway weapon plagues. The central Mevlani thought matrix had developed philosophical fractures that threatened their species' unity. It was a peace born of necessity, not reconciliation. Deep beneath the diplomatic pleasantries, both civilizations were already calculating how to exploit the peace to their advantage. Cathal's secondary brain was already formulating plans to corrupt the buffer zone monitors. Ixora had seeded 3 supposedly abandoned systems with dormant crystal tech that would awaken at her command. What none of them expected was the sudden appearance of an unidentified vessel at the edge of the system. A ship of unmistakably human design, its hull bearing the audacious motto, "We make peace stick." The vessel's arrival triggered immediate chaos in the Assembly's communication networks. The Juridian military attache's chromatophores flashed warning patterns, while the Mevlani delegation's crystalline forms resonated with alarm frequencies. "Humans," hissed Cathal, his translator struggling to convey his mixture of surprise and contempt. "What business do those primitives have here?" "They were granted observer status 3 cycles ago," Ixora noted, her crystal lattice structure shifting to a defensive configuration. "Though I fail to see what they could possibly contribute to matters beyond their comprehension." The Assembly's chief protocol officer, a gaseous entity contained within an ornate hovering sphere, drifted anxiously between the delegations. "The human vessel is hailing us. Their captain requests immediate audience with the full Assembly." "Denied." Cathal and Ixora responded simultaneously, then glanced at each other in rare agreement. The protocol officer's containment sphere flickered with nervous energy. "I regret to inform the distinguished representatives that the humans have invoked Article 17 of the Galactic Charter. The Assembly is obligated to grant them audience." Article 17. Cathal's secondary tentacles writhed in agitation. "The third-party verification protocol. On what grounds?" The answer came as the observation deck's main display activated, showing a human female in a simple but immaculate uniform standing on the bridge of her vessel. "On grounds," Captain Eleanor Chen stated calmly, "that neither of your species intends to honor this peace for a moment longer than necessary to rearm." The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage. Their expansion had been rapid but largely confined to a small cluster of stars far from the conflict zone. The galactic community had initially dismissed them as just another Bictal curiosity, until they'd negotiated impossible treaties between the Arcturus hives and the Rigelian Empire, ending a territorial dispute that had seemed eternal. Captain Eleanor Chen of the United Earthship Arbiter stood on her command bridge, the holographic displays surrounding her like a cage of light. Her vessel, shaped like a stretched teardrop with stabilizing rings, had translated into normal space with deliberate visibility, though she could have chosen stealth. "Diplomatic protest incoming, Captain," reported her communications officer, a woman whose augmented eyes glowed faintly as they processed the flood of alien transmissions. 17 different species are demanding our immediate withdrawal. The Juridian sub-admiral is threatening to open fire. Chen smiled slightly. "Put me through to the emergency council and deploy our diplomatic shield array. Let's show them we came prepared for either outcome." The ship's external hull shimmered as metamaterials reconfigured, creating a defense that would absorb energy weapons while projecting a continuous message of peaceful intent in 47 different communication spectrums. Within the hastily assembled emergency council, convened in the assembly's crisis chamber, a room unused for centuries before today, Chen faced down the gathered representatives. The air was thick with tension and alien pheromones. "We detected irregularities in the peace treaty's implementation," she explained, her voice steady despite the obvious hostility directed at her. "Earth intelligence believes critical details are being concealed from the assembly." Ambassador Cathal's tentacles writhed in indignation, secreting defensive toxins that his ceremonial containment field barely managed to neutralize. "This is an outrageous breach of sovereignty. Humans have no standing in this conflict. Your species was still flinging feces at each other when my ancestors developed interstellar travel." "On the contrary," Chen replied calmly, unfolding a holographic display that expanded to fill the chamber. She tapped a command on her wrist unit, and suddenly the air was filled with trillions of data points, ship movements, energy signatures, resource allocations, all compiled and analyzed by Earth's quantum intelligence networks. Article 17 of the Assembly Charter allows for third-party verification when evidence suggests deception that threatens galactic stability, and our evidence is comprehensive. The display zoomed in on a supposedly abandoned moon where Mevlani crystal tech was clearly being cultivated in vast underground chambers. Then it shifted to a Juridian scientific outpost that was actually manufacturing biological weapons of terrifying potential. Several neutral representatives gasped, one literally liquefied with stress. "The hostilities may seem resolved," Chen stated, her dark eyes reflecting the damning evidence swirling around them. "But without accountability, you're simply setting the stage for an even more catastrophic war. And frankly, neither of your species deserves to die because your leaders are trapped in outdated thinking patterns." The chamber fell silent. No species in living memory had dared speak to the ancient powers with such blunt assessment. High Chancellor Ixora's crystalline form pulsed with cold blue light, a sign of controlled rage among her kind. "And what gives humans the right to interfere in matters beyond their comprehension? Your species hasn't even mastered efficient interstellar travel." Chen's expression remained impassive. "Perhaps that's precisely why we see what you cannot. We aren't blinded by millennia of hatred or technological arrogance. We're offering something neither of you has considered, a third path. And if we refuse this, interference," Kefal demanded, his primary tentacles forming the ritual pattern that signified an imminent threat display. "Then," Chen replied with the same calm certainty, "Earth is prepared to enforce compliance. Not through superior firepower. We freely acknowledge our technological limitations, but through means you haven't anticipated because you've been fighting the same way for too long." She deactivated the holographic display with a flick of her wrist. "You have 24 hours to consider our proposal for a joint verification regime. After that, we implement our solutions whether you cooperate or not." As Chen turned to leave, the Galactic Assembly's chief mediator, a being of pure energy contained in an ancient mechanical shell, spoke for the first time. "Captain Chen, no species has ever successfully imposed terms on either the Juridian Concordat or the Mevlani Coalition. What makes humans believe they can succeed where others have failed? Chen paused at the chamber's threshold. Because we're willing to try approaches that your diplomatic traditions would consider unorthodox. The Juridians and Mevlani were accustomed to the careful, measured processes of the Galactic Assembly. Centuries of bureaucratic tradition dictated that violations be documented in octuplicate. Subcommittees formed to establish the parameters for forming actual committees, reports filed through 17 layers of authentication, and sanctions gradually implemented over years or decades, often long after the originators of the violations had died of old age. The humans had other ideas. Captain Chen stood in the swirling golden sands of the Assembly's temporal reflection chamber, a space designed for contemplative decision-making that typically hosted discussions lasting months. She had requisitioned it for a mission briefing that lasted precisely 38 minutes. Team Obsidian will deploy to the Nexus worlds. She instructed the assembled human specialists, each wearing adaptive environmental suits that made them look more machine than organic. Team Amber, you're responsible for the demilitarized corridors. Team Cobalt, deep penetration into suspected black sites. By the time the Assembly's Preliminary Action Assessment Group had scheduled their first meeting to discuss the human proposals, Captain Chen had already deployed 47 autonomous verification drones throughout the contested regions. They utilized a confounding mix of technologies, some advanced enough to impress even the Mevlani, others so primitive they slipped beneath advanced detection systems designed to catch more sophisticated intrusion methods. When the Juridians attempted to jam human communications, they discovered the humans were using a bewildering array of redundant systems, from quantum entangled particles to simple radio waves to modified versions of the Juridians' own biotelepathic networks. "This is unprecedented," protested the Assembly moderator, a gelatinous entity from a species known for its deliberative nature. Its speech bubbles formed slowly, each word carefully considered before being voiced. "There are procedures. While you establish committees, both sides are preparing for renewed conflict," interrupted Commander Rashid, Chen's tactical officer. His dark eyes flashed with barely contained intensity as he projected images of a Mevlani crystal factory producing what were unmistakably weapon cores. "Our approach is direct. Immediate verification, transparent reporting, and consequences for non-compliance. But the diplomatic implications," began an avian representative from a neutral power, "are less concerning than extinction-level conflict," finished Lieutenant Park, extracting a sample of a pathogen discovered in a supposedly decommissioned Juridian biolab, a pathogen specifically engineered to shatter Mevlani crystal structures at the molecular level. On Kethvar, a disputed world of floating mountains and valuable mineral deposits, Commander Rashid's team discovered a hidden Juridian weapons cache, large enough to subjugate an entire sector. When confronted by a Juridian dreadnought that appeared suddenly from hyperspace, Rashid didn't retreat or call for backup. Instead, he invited the Juridian commander to inspect the evidence personally, while broadcasting the entire interaction to every species in the Galactic Arm. Simultaneously, on New Crystallis, Lieutenant Park's team exposed a Mevlani facility developing a targeted waveform weapon designed to liquefy Juridian neural tissue. When High Chancellor Ixora herself demanded their withdrawal, Park simply asked her, on an open channel, "Would you prefer we leave this evidence for the Juridians to discover instead? Or should we work together to decommission it properly and avoid further escalation?" The methodology shocked the galactic community. Humans moved with startling speed, improvising solutions with whatever materials were at hand. They operated with minimal oversight, their teams functioning with unusual autonomy that nonetheless never strayed from their central mission. Most disturbing to both the Juridians and Mevlani, the humans showed no favoritism. They exposed violations on both sides with equal vigor and precision, treating both ancient powers not as fearsome enemies, but as misbehaving parties who simply needed proper supervision. And for the first time in centuries, neutral species began to speak up, emboldened by the human example. The previously silent Photonic Collective offered access to their sensor networks. The reclusive void swimmers provided transportation through dimensional shortcuts. The human intervention had catalyzed something unexpected: hope. 3 weeks after their arrival, the humans called an emergency assembly session. The Grand Chamber, a vast amphitheater with adaptive environments to accommodate over 300 species simultaneously, buzzed with tension. Ancient enemies sat side by side, united briefly in their mutual concern about human interference. Captain Chen entered not in the traditional floating platform used by most speakers, but simply walked to the center of the chamber. The action itself was shocking. The chamber floor was designed to accommodate everything from high-gravity species to methane brothers to entities composed of pure energy. No organic being had ever risked direct exposure to its adaptive systems. Yet Chen stood there, seemingly comfortable despite environment fields shifting around her, her uniform crisp, her expression resolute. Slight modifications in her stance were the only indication she was compensating for gravity fluctuations that would crush most beings. We have confirmed 372 major treaty violations by the Juridian Concordat, she announced, her voice artificially amplified throughout the chamber. A holographic display materialized, showing detailed evidence of each violation. Weapon systems disguised as civilian infrastructure, hunter-killer satellites hidden inside asteroids, biological weapons laboratories concealed beneath religious sites, and 319 by the Mevlani Coalition. A second display appeared, equally damning. Crystal tech being weaponized on supposedly abandoned moons, thought matrix extensions programmed to control and subvert neutral populations, dimensional destabilizers placed at strategic points throughout the demilitarized zone. At the current trajectory, full-scale hostilities will resume within 6 standard months. Our predictive models indicate a 78% probability that the renewed conflict will result in the complete extinction of one or both civilizations within 5 years. Murmurs rippled through the assembly chamber as Chen continued. Earth has authorized me to present the following terms. Both factions will immediately submit to a human-led verification regime with unrestricted access to all military installations and government communications. The chamber erupted in outrage. The Juridian delegation's tentacles twisted into threat displays so toxic that several nearby representatives had to activate emergency environmental shielding. The Mevlani crystalline forms began resonating at frequencies that made the chamber's artificial gravity flicker dangerously. "This is beyond presumptuous," thundered Cathal. "You would have us submit to the oversight of primitives. Your species still kills each other over trivial resource disputes and imaginary boundary lines." And yet, Chen replied mildly, "We haven't driven ourselves to the brink of mutual extinction. Twice." That silenced even the most vocal protests. It was a historical fact both civilizations preferred to forget. This wasn't their first catastrophic war. Each had nearly destroyed the other millennia ago, only to rebuild and repeat the same patterns. "If you refuse, Earth will implement Protocol Omega," Chen concluded, her voice cutting through the renewed murmurs of discontent. "And what?" High Chancellor Ixora asked Icily, her crystalline form pulsing with cold light. "Is Protocol Omega?" Chen's expression remained neutral as she activated a small holographic projector on her wrist. It displayed what appeared to be simple mechanical designs, nothing like the advanced technology both civilizations employed. A series of carefully calibrated interventions that will make continued military buildup impossible for both sides. The senior Juridian military attaché studied the schematics, his secondary brain analyzing the designs. "These are primitive sabotage devices, chemical explosives, mechanical disruption systems, nothing our defenses couldn't neutralize in moments." "Correct," Chen agreed with a slight smile. "Which is precisely why you won't detect them until they've already been deployed. Sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective." No one in the chamber missed the implicit threat. Somehow, this species of soft-skinned bipeds barely a century into their interstellar phase believed they could force compliance from civilizations that had traversed the stars for millennia. The truly terrifying part: the humans seemed absolutely confident in their ability to do so. Neither the Juridians nor the Mevlani took the human ultimatum seriously. In private communications, which they believed secure from human monitoring, both sides accelerated their military preparations, certain that the humans were bluffing or delusional. These primitives think they can challenge us. War Patriarch Jakrath of the Juridian 10th Dominance hissed to his commanders, his pheromones laced with contempt. We were splitting atoms when they were learning to use fire. In the Crystal Matrix data space where Mevlani leadership convened, Strategic Overseer Helix Prime pulsed with amusement. Their neural pathways are simplistic and predictable. We have modeled their species completely. They possess neither the technology nor the collective intelligence to challenge us. The Juridians decided to make an example of the human verification team on Caspera IV, a mineral-rich world critical to their industrial base. They deployed a stealth strike force, the elite Venom Guard, genetically enhanced warriors whose exoskeletons contain natural weapon systems that could penetrate most known defenses. The Venom Guard commander, Toxic Master Grell, led the assault personally, approaching the small prefabricated habitat where the humans had established their monitoring station. His elite warriors surrounded the structure, cloaking fields rendering them nearly invisible even to advanced sensors. "Neutralize all humans," he ordered. "Make it painless but final. We aren't barbarians." The assault began precisely at local midnight. The Venom Guard breached the habitat's outer walls with practiced efficiency, only to find themselves falling through the floor into a series of precisely calculated traps. Gravity fields suddenly reversed. Non-lethal nerve agents specifically calibrated to Juridian biology filled the air. Sonic disruptors operating at frequencies that disrupted their neurochemical communication rendered them unable to coordinate. When Toxic Master Grell regained consciousness, he found himself bound by restraints he couldn't identify, facing a young human female who appeared to be analyzing data on a primitive screen. "How did you know?" he demanded, his translator struggling to convey his mixture of rage and confusion. The human glanced up, seeming almost surprised to see him conscious. "Game theory predicted a 94% probability you'd attack this location within 3 days of our ultimatum. We simply prepared accordingly. But our cloaking technology is based on bending light around a gravitic displacement field," she completed his thought. "Impressive, but it still displaces air molecules in predictable patterns. We just tracked the atmospheric disturbances. Old hunting technique from Earth, watching for unnatural movements in grass to spot camouflaged predators." Simultaneously, on the Mevlani military hub of Crystallis Prime, Commander Rashid's team executed an even more audacious operation. The Mevlani had believed their crystal tech consciousness network impossible for primitives to comprehend, let alone infiltrate. They were wrong. Rashid's specialists had reverse-engineered the fundamental principles of crystal tech by studying broken fragments recovered from old battlefields. They hadn't attempted to replicate the technology. Instead, they'd developed targeted influence patterns that could interact with it on a fundamental level. When the Mevlani defense grid performed its scheduled synchronization, it incorporated code sequences the humans had carefully introduced through seemingly minor infrastructure systems. The entire planetary defense grid entered a diagnostic cycle that effectively disabled it for 17 crucial minutes. In that window, Rashid's team infiltrated the secret shipyard constructing prohibited destroyer-class vessels and attached primitive but effective physical locks to key systems, literally mechanical clamps and restraints that the crystal tech couldn't interface with or disable. "How?" demanded the Mevlani war director when Rashid contacted their high command. His crystal form was pulsing with harmonics of disbelief and outrage. "This technology should be beyond your capabilities. We've had to become very good at asymmetric warfare," Rashid explained, as his team continued installing mechanical locks on critical systems. "When you're the technological underdog, you develop alternative approaches. We didn't try to match your technology. We found its blind spots instead." The truth dawned slowly across the galaxy. Humanity's strength wasn't their technology, which indeed lagged behind many species. It was their tactical innovation, their unpredictability, and their willingness to take calculated risks that other species would consider irrational. After the demonstrations on Caspera IV and Crystallis Prime, the Galactic Assembly expected the humans to press their advantage immediately, to demand capitulation, to establish military control over key systems, perhaps even to extract concessions that would benefit Earth. Such was the way of galactic politics. Advantage pressed became advantage secured. Instead, Captain Chen returned to the assembly with a revised proposal, entering the chamber flanked not by armed guards, but by a diverse team of human specialists, engineers, diplomats, cultural anthropologists, and conflict resolution experts. They carried no weapons but instead brought elaborately detailed holographic models and data displays. The chamber had been buzzing with agitated communications, but fell silent as Chen took her position at the speaker's podium. "We recognize the sovereignty concerns our previous approach raised," she acknowledged, her voice modulated to project calmness and rationality. Protocol Omega has been modified to operate with minimal human presence and maximum respect for the dignities of both civilizations. Suspicious murmurs gave way to cautious curiosity as Chen's team activated their displays, revealing a comprehensive peace-building framework unlike anything the Assembly had seen before. The revised plan was ingenious in its interlocking safeguards. A network of tamper-proof monitoring stations would be established throughout both territories, operated jointly by a diverse coalition of neutral species. The monitoring technology utilized transparent algorithms that any party could inspect and verify. Strategic resources needed for weaponry would be placed under temporary assembly control, with continuous accounting accessible to all interested parties. Most surprising was the economic component. Rather than sanctions, the humans proposed restructuring economic incentives to reward compliance. Trade routes would be redesigned to make both civilizations increasingly interdependent while simultaneously more connected to the wider galactic community. Resource-sharing protocols would ensure that neither side could gain a meaningful military advantage, while both would see substantial civilian benefits. "This isn't punishment," Chen explained, as her specialists demonstrated simulations showing the long-term benefits to both civilizations. "It's rehabilitation. Both the Juridians and Mevlani are trapped in a security dilemma where neither can trust the other's intentions. We're creating the conditions where trust becomes possible again." A specialist in conflict psychology, Dr. Melissa Okafor, stepped forward. "We've analyzed the psychological patterns that drive this conflict. Both species associate security exclusively with military dominance rather than with stable relations. Protocol Omega creates a transitional phase where security comes from transparency and verification, allowing both civilizations to gradually rewire these destructive associations." When Ambassador K. Thull protested that compliance would leave his people vulnerable, Chen's response was characteristically human. She walked directly to the Juridian delegation, ignoring warnings about the toxic pheromones their agitation was releasing, and looked the ambassador directly in all four of his eyes. "If either side attempts to exploit the other's compliance, you will face the full diplomatic, economic, and, if necessary, military response of Earth and our allies," she stated, her voice steady and resolute. "We guarantee the security of any party acting in good faith." It was unprecedented. A relatively minor power shouldering the responsibility of guaranteeing peace between two vastly more powerful civilizations. Yet the humans spoke with such conviction that many in the assembly began to wonder if they knew something the rest of the galaxy didn't. "Your species lacks the military capability to enforce such guarantees," objected High Chancellor Ixora, her crystalline form oscillating with skepticism. Chen smiled slightly. "Military capability isn't our only leverage. After the incidents on Caspera IV and Crystallis Prime, 37 previously neutral systems have approached Earth with alliance proposals. We've designed Protocol Omega to succeed with or without military intervention." She activated a final holographic display, showing a complex web of economic, diplomatic, and informational connections spanning the galaxy. The old paradigm of conflict resolution relied on force. We're offering something different, a system where peace is maintained through interconnection rather than threat. As Protocol Omega's implementation began, the Galactic Assembly's Cultural Exchange Initiative requested human representatives explain their unusual approach to interstellar diplomacy. The request wasn't merely academic. Dozens of species with their own territorial disputes were suddenly interested in what the humans called sustainable peace architecture. Dr. Amara Okafor, Earth's foremost xenopolitical theorist, addressed a packed assembly hall. Representatives from nearly 500 worlds attended, either in person or via quantum projection, an unprecedented audience for what was nominally an educational lecture. Throughout our history, humans have fought countless wars, she began, standing calmly at the center of the vast chamber. For territory, for resources, for ideology. We've nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times, but we've learned something crucial from our bloodiest conflicts. True peace isn't just the absence of violence. It's the creation of systems that make violence irrational. Behind her, a holographic display showed the progression of human conflict resolution systems, from early tribal justice to international courts to global governance frameworks. Our species has a unique evolutionary history, she continued. We evolved as social predators who could form complex cooperative groups beyond immediate kin. This gave us remarkable adaptability, but also created the potential for devastating in-group/out-group conflicts. A gasic representative, an entity composed of intelligent atmospheric gases contained in a hovering mechanical sphere, pulsed with curious luminescence. How does this explain your interventionist approach to the Juridian-Mevlani conflict? Most developing species prioritize technological advancement over social innovation. Dr. Okafor smiled, because we learned, through bitter experience, that technological advancement without corresponding social evolution leads to extinction. Multiple times in our history, we developed weapons that could destroy our civilization before we developed the wisdom to manage them properly. She explained how humans had emerged from their most devastating global wars to establish international frameworks that gradually reduced conflicts through interdependence, transparency, and mutual security guarantees. What you're witnessing isn't arrogance, she continued, as the display showed Earth's historical progression of warfare, from primitive tribal conflicts to the nuclear age to the modern era of relative stability. It's the pattern recognition of a species intimately familiar with the cycle of war and false peace. We see in the Juridian-Mevlani conflict echoes of our Cold War, our world wars, our centuries of European power struggles. A Mevlani academic, one of the few willing to engage directly with humans, raised a crystalline appendage. Your species lacks the computational capacity to model conflicts of our complexity. The Juridian-Mevlani theological territorial dispute spans 17 dimensions of reality. True, Dr. Okafor acknowledged, but sometimes an outside perspective sees patterns invisible to those trapped within them. We don't need to understand every theological nuance to recognize a security dilemma when we see one. Most sobering was her conclusion. We intervened not because we think ourselves superior, but because we recognize the path you're on. We've walked it ourselves, and we know where it leads. She projected a final image, Earth during its darkest hours of nuclear brinkmanship, with missile trajectories arcing across continents. Humanity survived this phase of our development by the narrowest of margins. Multiple times, we came within minutes of extinction due to misunderstandings, technical glitches, or simple human error. We didn't intervene in your conflict because we know more than you. We intervened because we've made almost every possible mistake in conflict management, and we recognize them when we see others making the same ones. The assembly chamber fell silent. Many species had assumed human involvement stemmed from ambition or self-interest. The possibility that it came from a place of hard-won wisdom and genuine concern was something few had considered. Your approach is, unexpectedly empathetic, observed the ancient Void Archon, a being so old it had witnessed the rise and fall of multiple galactic civilizations. Most young species are too focused on their own advancement to concern themselves with others' conflicts. Perhaps, Dr. Okafor replied with a gentle smile. That's because empathy itself was one of our greatest evolutionary advantages. One standard year after the humans' arrival, the Galactic Assembly convened a special session to evaluate Protocol Omega's progress. The Grand Chamber was transformed for the occasion, no longer divided into the traditional adversarial sections, but arranged in concentric circles to emphasize equality among participants. Captain Chen, now Admiral Chen, her promotion a recognition of her diplomatic achievements, took her place alongside representatives from both the Juridian Concordat and the Mevlani Coalition. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Where once there had been rigid formality and barely concealed hostility, now there was cautious professional respect. A neutral arbiter, a quantum collective entity that existed simultaneously across multiple probability states, presented the verification results through a series of three-dimensional projections that filled the chamber. The statistics were undeniable. Verified disarmament had reached 78% completion. Trade between formerly hostile systems had increased threefold. Cultural exchange programs had begun on border worlds. For the first time in generations, civilian travel across faction boundaries occurred without incident. The hostilities are truly resolving, High Chancellor Ixora acknowledged, her crystalline form glowing with cautious optimism. The fractal patterns in her lattice structure had evolved over the past year, incorporating elements that synapsychologists identified as representing new thought paradigms. Ambassador Cathal, normally suspicious, added, and in a manner neither of our civilizations anticipated. His secondary tentacles, once constantly coiled in defensive postures, now remained relaxed in what humans had learned was a Juridian expression of contemplative calm. Admiral Chen smiled slightly. This is how humans make peace, not through temporary arrangements that preserve the underlying causes of conflict, but by addressing the structural factors that make peace unsustainable. She gestured to the holographic displays showing thriving joint colonies in former demilitarized zones, by creating shared stakes in prosperity, by building monitoring systems transparent enough to foster trust, by ensuring that cooperation yields greater benefits than competition. The most remarkable development was the Joint Research Initiative, where Juridian bioengineering and Mevlani crystal tech scientists worked together on medical applications for technologies once used exclusively for warfare. Their first breakthrough, a treatment for a degenerative neural condition affecting multiple species, had already saved millions of lives. Your approach was unconventional, noted the Assembly's senior arbitrator, an entity so ancient that most younger species have forgotten its origins. Initially, many believed you were simply using an unorthodox method to establish human dominance in this sector. That was never our intention, Chen replied. Earth has no territorial ambitions in this region. Our only goal was preventing an extinction-level conflict that would have destabilized this entire galactic arm. The human approach, direct, occasionally confrontational, stubbornly optimistic, and thoroughly pragmatic, had initially seemed naive to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy. Now, many were studying what they called human-style diplomacy with intense interest. We finalized matters our fashion, Chen concluded, not because we believed ourselves wiser than species with millennia of history, but because sometimes an outside perspective sees patterns invisible to those trapped within them. As the session concluded, representatives from 17 previously neutral systems approached the human delegation with requests for similar conflict resolution assistance in their own troubled regions. The Juridian War Patriarch, in a private conversation with Cathal that was nevertheless picked up by human monitoring systems, summed it up best. These humans are dangerous, not because of their weapons or technology, but because they make peace contagious. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest contribution wouldn't be their technology or their resource wealth, but their unique perspective on peace, born from thousands of years of getting it catastrophically wrong before finally starting to get it right. The hostilities were resolved, finalized in human fashion, imperfectly, pragmatically, but with a fundamental optimism that lasting peace wasn't just possible, but inevitable if you designed the right systems to sustain it. Earth had introduced something more disruptive than any weapon: the radical notion that ancient enemies could become partners in prosperity. And that perhaps was the most human idea of all.